Please welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Belinda Strana. Thank you so much for all the love and support. To my returning subscribers, to those people that share my videos, leave commentaries, and also educate each and every one of us, you guys are the real MVP. So lovely. So lovely. I came across this video on my For You, and I thought to share where this Hispanic and Native American is all out to talk about how segregation is only talked about among black and pan-colored people, and every other person does not really care about their own community. He goes as far as to talk about how black people is only centering themselves and forgetting that every other person was actually segregated. I'm just going to roll the clip as well as some of other stitches I was able to put together. Please leave me your own thoughts in the comment section of what you think of this video, and please don't forget that we do not support any form of bullying.
During segregation, where did everyone else sit? They didn't. During segregation, it was a black versus white world. That's what it was set up for. Filipinos, Asians, Native Americans, they were straight up denied municipal services. They were denied entry into these restaurants. They just were the forgotten ones. They weren't even allowed to drink from the fountain. They had to go find something. And so when we look back at this history and how binary it's been in its black versus white coding, what the fuck about the rest of everybody? Thousands and thousands of ethnicities in this country. Why is it just this binary 1 versus 0, 0 versus 1 in this country? Latinos were segregated, but by custom, not by law. It's been a black versus white thing, and that's their feud. They've been doing it for decades and decades and decades. The rest of us has just been watching and finding our own fountains in restaurants to go to. During segregation, many black nationalists were only fighting for black rights. They didn't care about Native American rights. If they had cheese and some flour, good for them. We want our restaurants and we want equality. As horrific as that time fucking was, that's where people's heads were at. They were only focusing on their communities. So thank God for civil rights leaders who rose to the fucking occasion. During the time of segregation, Native Americans were thrown onto barren lands, sanctioned reservations that the government threw them onto, and were thrown cheese and some flour and said, good luck, I hope you survive. Because they were hoping they would starve out, because if they were to starve, it wouldn't count as murder. So forgive Native Americans for not focusing on black rights during that time, all of them, because some were, because they were too busy trying to figure out how not to starve to death with the fucking government cheese and flour that they were given. So during the time...
So while he's not completely wrong, there are some things that are wrong. This is not a black and white feud. This is how white supremacy has set up the system to be binary. That is not the fault of black people. Also, it wasn't just customary for other marginalized communities of color to be affected by Jim Crow laws. It was also legal. Jim Crow laws were not just for black people. They were for all marginalized communities of color. Now, the reason for these misconceptions are for a couple things. One, when history is taught here in the United States, they almost completely erase all other marginalized communities of color from the history books and only speak on black oppression, black enslavement, and the systemic violence against black people. Two, with Jim Crow laws, they didn't really specifically say black people. They would use terms like colored or Negro, which most people don't know applied to other communities of color, not just black people. Jack D. Forbes is a very, very well-respected Native American historian. And I would encourage people to go read this paper that he wrote on the use of the terms Negro and Black to include persons of Native American ancestry in Anglo-North America. So I'm going to read this first part real quick. In 1854, the California State Supreme Court sought to bar all non-Caucasians from equal citizenship and civil rights. The court stated, the word black may include all Negroes, but the term Negro does not include all black persons. We are of the opinion that the words white, Negro, mulatto, and black persons, whenever they occur in our Constitution, must be taken in their generic sense. That the words black person in the 14th section must be taken as contradistinguished from white and necessarily includes all races other than Caucasians. Basically, Negro meant any person of color. The paper goes on to explain the Spanish and Portuguese usage of the words and how it applied to Native American people. And it also applied to Asian people. In the Philippines, the Spaniards called them negritos, but they weren't black. A lot of times people fixate on what the word negro or negro meant, which meant the color black, and associate that to black Americans. The creation of the white and black binary system in the United States was to, one, completely cover up and erase the genocide of Native American people. Two, cover up and erase the enslavement of everybody else besides black people. Because if the world understood that it wasn't just black people that they were enslaving, then this is a bigger problem. The black and white binary system also creates a racial caste system that ignores how other marginalized communities of color are actually treated in the system. It makes it appear that black is always at the bottom and that other marginalized communities of color have proximity to whiteness. All of that is a myth. All people of color are at the bottom. And sometimes some groups will get a little bit more privilege during certain periods because that's what benefits white supremacy in that moment. But then those privileges get taken away. This is also where the myth of the model minority comes in. Because while people will say that Asians are a quote-unquote model minority, they forget about Japanese internment camps, Filipino field workers, Chinese railroad workers, all who had horrible living conditions and didn't get paid very much. It also ignores the enslavement of Asians being brought over to the Americas to work as slaves. It ignores the enslavement of Native American people. And it hides the fact that Native Americans still exist, so they reclassify us into things like Latinos or Hispanics. They only say certain tribes can have federal recognition while other tribes cannot. It tells people who is Native and who isn't. It's a divide and conquer tactic to create the white and black binary system. Because of all of these myths and misunderstandings and misconceptions about racial caste systems here in the United States, along with how terminology was used back in those days, it perpetuates oppression Olympics and ignores the oppression, discrimination, racism put on to other marginalized communities of color. It highlights the anti-blackness in all of these other communities, but minimizes the anti-Native and anti-Asian sentiment that is occurring. And everybody falls for it. This is why it's important to study history, all aspects of history, not just the history of your own people, but the history of everybody else. Because otherwise you'll never understand white supremacy if you're only looking at it through the eyes of two groups of people. How are you talking about the importance of knowing history and you say Chinese people were slaves? They were never slaves. Exploited, yes, but that is blatantly incorrect. That's crazy. Then you say Chinese were horribly treated and severely discriminated against, but never slaves. Please don't traffic in historical lies. There's too much of that. We need truthful accounts of what we should know. You must not know my content, because I always come with receipts. But first of all, let's address the fact that I said Asians were enslaved, and the fact that you went straight to Chinese when I said the word Asians. Now, that's some racial prejudice you need to deconstruct and decolonize. After the abolition of the African slave trade in the British Empire in the early 1800s, there was a shortage of labor in the New World. South China became the West's favorite destination to find replacement laborers to export to their New World colonies. Britain also exported laborers from its own colony, India. More than 250,000 Chinese and 500,000 Asian Indians were shipped to the New World between the 1840s and 1870s under a, quote, new system of slavery where Asians replaced African slave labor. During the 18th century, the 13 North American colonies were not the only overseas possessions of the British. The most famous, arguably, was a land which had long been a center of colonial efforts in Europe and which was officially signed over bit by bit to England by 1757. India. When English settlers entered the colonies, many of them brought South Asians along as indentured laborers and as slaves. Records of some of these enslaved South Asians still survive. Thomas Greenwich fled from slavery in Virginia in late May of 1768. He was labeled as an, quote, East Indian Indian. The descriptor was used to distinguish South Asians from indigenous American people. Asian slaves in colonial Mexico from Chinos to Indians. As pointed out by Sejias, from the 16th century onwards, the Spanish and Portuguese began exporting enslaved people from Asia to the Americas, particularly Mexico, where labor was highly demanded as a result of the demographic collapse that took place because of the conquest. See what a little bit of research does for you? I bet you feel silly now. But wait, there's more. You also go on to say, it's true, early they tried to enslave natives in North, Central, and South America, but that didn't, quote, work out well. Died too easily. So unfortunately, Europeans looked for options, which led to the transatlantic slave trade. Actually, indigenous people, specifically the Taínos, were the first victims of the transatlantic slave trade. When Columbus got here in 1492, he started taking indigenous people back to Europe. And they also took some indigenous people to Africa as well. And then in 1510 is when they started bringing African people over. And only about 60% of indigenous people died of disease, which was also bioterrorism, because they literally inserted people who were sick into indigenous populations because they knew they would die from them. They would also work indigenous people literally to the death. They would barely give them time to sleep. And they worked in some of the most dangerous jobs, which was mining silver and gold. And when one died, they literally replaced them with another. And hundreds died on a daily basis. I would encourage you to read the book, The American Holocaust, and also read the book, The Other Slavery. Because also, indigenous slavery didn't end. It's still ongoing. And even after the Emancipation Proclamation happened, it wasn't until 2 years later that they passed the Peonage Act, because Europeans were getting away with enslaving indigenous people by calling them servants, even though they could not leave. And even when their quote-unquote contract was up, they still were forced to stay. And the Peonage Act was only passed because they needed troops to fight in the Union Army. And they had to pass that act to relieve the quote-unquote servants, who were actually slaves, from their masters. So why don't you take your own advice, and please don't traffic in historical lies, because there's too much of that. We need truthful accounts of what we should know. Stop erasing other people's oppressions. Have a day. My patience is running thin. First of all, I didn't say people of color were called people of color back then. I said we were called colored and also called Negroes. We were called those terms because of segregation laws. The vast majority of Jim Crow or segregation laws use the terms colored or Negro to describe who they were segregating against. Which is why Jim Crow laws not only applied to other people of color in the Southeast, but also applied to us in the Southwest. Hence why schools were segregated. Hence why there were court cases that were won to desegregate Mexican schools. While the legacy of segregated Mexican schools is largely unknown to many Texans, they existed across the American Southwest for nearly a century, including in predominantly Mexican communities along the U.S.-Mexico border. Former students of these schools continue to share their memories with the help of organizations like the Black Wall School Alliance. Few of these schools still exist today, but one school in Marfa is working to keep this chapter of Texas history alive. Mexican schools, often called Americanization schools, were established to help assimilate Mexican Americans into Anglo-American culture. The schools relied on practices like the banning of Spanish language on school grounds, lessons on American culture, and mandatory patriotic demonstrations such as pledging loyalty to the American flag. The evolution of Tejano education, historical perspectives, and challenges. Separate and unequal schools in Texas posed a problem. Segregation had originated earlier, but it expanded greatly between 1890 and 1980. In fact, by the 1940s, more than 122 school districts in 59 widely distributed counties had segregated schools for Mexican American children. At first, segregation was confined to the elementary grades because of the high withdrawal rates of Mexican children. When these children sought secondary schooling, officials established segregated facilities in these grades. Tejanos found Texas schools not only segregated, but also unequal. The buildings generally were older and dilapidated, recreation space was minimal and substandard, and school equipment was inadequate. Expenditures per pupil in the Hispanic schools were extremely low. The teaching staff lacked training, credentials, and experience. New teachers often were sent to Mexican schools to begin their careers. Another problem in Tejano education involved administration. Local administrators developed discriminatory measures as reflected in assessment and placement practices and in the interaction among Mexican American students, their peers, and the teaching staff. Mexican Americans won their own protracted struggle in a series of favorable verdicts from Texas courts that weakened racial separation. Among these were Delgado versus Bastrop ISD, 1948, which prohibited school boards from designating specific buildings in a school campus for Mexican children. In Hernandez versus State of Texas, 1954, the United States Supreme Court declared Mexican Americans to be a class to whom Jim Crow laws could not be applied. So up until 1954, Jim Crow laws were applied to Mexican people. Because in 1954 is when they desegregated the schools in Texas. And these cases, along with the Mendez versus Westminster case in California in 1947, all set a precedent and paved the way to help win the Supreme Court case, Brown versus Board of Education. Matter of fact, Thurgood Marshall actually wrote one of the amicus briefs for the Mendez versus Westminster case in California. Mexicans and black people have always been working together, not only in the streets, but also in court cases. We built off of each other. We helped each other. Now, you asked me to go watch all your little videos on your page, and I did. Well, most of them. And it's very obvious you have an agenda, and whatever interviews you conducted were very much biased. The questions that were asked were things like, did Mexicans go to white schools? Were Mexicans racist towards black people? Asking black people, did Mexicans treat you bad? Because you're trying to prove some kind of proximity to whiteness and play oppression Olympics with Mexican people. But let's talk about all of our struggles and fights up through the civil rights movement. Since you want to bring up Texas so much, you ever hear about the Goliad hanging tree in Goliad, Texas? If not, I suggest you look it up. Or what about what the Texas Rangers did to Mexicans all across Texas in order to steal land for the King Ranch? Why don't you go look up how many Mexicans were lynched? The history of racial violence on the Mexico-Texas border. Some of the worst racial violence in United States history took place along the Mexico-Texas border from 1910 to 1920. The dead included women and men, the aged and the young, longtime residents and recent arrivals. They were killed by strangers, by neighbors, by vigilantes, and at the hands of local law enforcement officers and the Texas Rangers. Some were summarily executed after being taken captive or shot under the flimsy pretext of trying to escape. Some were left in the open to rot, others desecrated by being burnt, decapitated, or tortured by means such as having beer bottles rammed into their mouths. Extra-legal executions became so common that a San Antonio reporter observed that, quote, finding of dead bodies of Mexicans suspected for various reasons of being connected with the Troubles has reached a point where it creates little or no interest. It is only when a raid is reported or an American is killed that the ire of the people is aroused, end quote. Not to mention, Mexicans are detribalized Native American people. We also were enslaved and genocided. The Southwest United States was colonized 3 times, once by the Spaniards, the second time by the Criollos, and the third time by the U.S. government. My people not only lost 1 language, but we lost 2 languages. You want to talk about accounts of discrimination and segregation? I have a video of my 82-year-old grandma on my page, where she talks about being beaten with rulers every time she spoke Spanish, or locked in a closet because she was too stupid to learn English in the 1st grade. And that's not just my grandma's story. That's thousands of grandmas and grandpas and parents' stories. But while the people you interviewed may have had some decent experiences in Texas, those are not the experiences of thousands upon thousands of other people. Actually, we can just go up into the millions. We are not a monolith. Our experiences are not a monolith. But racism, oppression, segregation, Jim Crow laws, genocide has all occurred to me and my people in our lands. So maybe go deal with your xenophobia, your anti-nativeness, and stop trying to play oppression Olympics with Indigenous people. Have a night.
So, let me tell you a story that was never supposed to be told. Because if people really understood how chattel slavery started, they'd have to admit that this country was never innocent. It wasn't founded on freedom. It was founded on a formula: blood, control, and legal torture. See, chattel slavery wasn't just slavery. It was the most brutal, calculated system of human degradation ever written into law. And America didn't inherit it. It built it. On purpose. So we're taught that the story starts in 1619 when the original enslaved people arrived in Virginia. But it really starts way before that on the coast of West Africa, where human beings were hunted, villages raided, mothers dragged from their homes, babies taken from their backs, people chained together, branded with hot irons, burned like cattle before they even touched a slave ship. Then came the Middle Passage, bodies stacked below deck, no air, no light, no dignity. Many died. Some jumped into the ocean on their own terms. They would rather drown than be sold. But when they arrived in the colonies, they weren't welcomed. They were inspected, priced, and sold. Children torn from mothers, spouses separated without a second thought. And the worst part? There were no laws protecting them, because there were no laws that recognized them as human. They weren't seen as people, because they were property. And yeah, some African leaders played a role in the trade. Some sold prisoners of war or rival groups into European hands. But this idea that Africans sold their own people, that's a distraction. Africa is a continent full of hundreds of cultures and languages. The Europeans showed up with weapons, gold, and a business model, and they built the market for human lives. Without European demand, there is no transatlantic slave trade. Full stop. In the early colonial days, slavery didn't start as permanent. Some Africans were treated as indentured servants, just like poor Europeans. But then white landowners saw an opportunity. Why release a worker when you can just own them forever? Why pay for labor when you can force women to give birth to your next generation of workers? So they changed the laws. If your mother was enslaved, you were too. No exceptions. Becoming Christian didn't mean freedom anymore. White servants got contracts and land. Black people got lifelong bondage. That wasn't confusion. That was strategy. They were never trying to civilize Black people. They were trying to own them forever. But wait, how do you convince a society that all of this is okay? You build a lie. They said Black people were cursed, less intelligent, animal-like. They used scripture. They used fake science, measuring skulls, ranking races, and publishing pseudoscience to prove what they already decided was true. They needed people to believe that we were made for this. Because if we were human, then the system couldn't be justified. So they rewrote what it meant to be human. White supremacy wasn't born out of slavery. It was born with it. By the 1700s, America wasn't using slavery. It was running on it. Cotton, tobacco, sugar, every dollar was built on Black backs. And our bodies weren't just labor, they were capital. You could borrow money against an enslaved person, insure them, trade them. Black women were forced to give birth, not for family, but for profit. They turned wombs into factories. Wall Street involved. Banks invested. Universities funded by it. Presidents benefited. This wasn't a broken system. This was the system. People love to call it America's original sin. But sin sounds like a mistake. This wasn't a mistake. This was a blueprint. A system designed to extract everything from Black life. Labor, language, names, lineage, and leave us buried in unmarked graves. And after they took everything, they rewrote the story to make themselves look like heroes. So no, chattel slavery wasn't about labor. It was about domination, reproduction, and inheritance. It wasn't just brutal. It was intentional, legal, and profitable. And it didn't end when it was abolished. It just evolved into prisons, into housing policies, into generational theft. So you want to talk about American values? Well, this was the first one. And this country has been protecting it ever since.
Seriously, lovely. It's just so, fortunate that anytime that people at least like me decide to like come out here to actually talk about how they've been, highly segregated and all of that. Every other TRC group, tend to like pick on and talk about how, oh my god, like people is not concerned about them. They are also experiencing the same fate as people that looks like me and all of that. Like I have seen some videos about not only Asian people or even Hispanic people, most of them who often come on the social platforms to rant and tell people that looks like me that you are not the only ones that is being oppressed, that they are also oppressed and all of that. There's this particular video which I try as much as I can to stitch her, but I have not been not able. I'm unable to get a stitch. So this Asian woman come out to tell people that looks like me to cut off with all of the oppression Olympic, that themselves also went through slavery. They went through all manner of humiliations and all of that, and they are not the ones. They're not the only ones who has gone through a lot in the hands of oppressors. Like they often make things all about, oh, it's only people that looks like me that have gone through slavery and all of that. This is not even the case. The thing is that even if you don't want to accept the truth, that was the reason why I put up what they call chattel slavery. These people, often come to argue about how every other person have faced slavery, have faced oppression and all of that, even realizing that people that looks like me went through what they call chattel slavery. Even if some pink colored or PRC people actually thought that, oh, they have actually been all discriminated or have gone through the exact same thing that people that looks like me have gone through it. Like you cannot equate your own struggle to that of people that looks like me. And this is he even Native American man who is like, oh my god, that people who actually fought for this activist stuff abandon other POC people and focused more on people that looks like me, while these other POC are also suffering. Like good thing is that the good thing is that the people who made it possible to end slavery for every other POC people are what? They're still people that looks like me, right? They're still black people. Like with all of the ups and downs and try to debate here front and back and all of that, it is still people that looks like me that fought it through, and every other person was free from the hands of the oppressed masters during the time. It is because of these people that you are able to still have, a voice. It is same because of these people that there are massive, people migrating to the state, even if at this present administration trying to take those people back. It is because of these said people and their struggles, their ancestors, and all of that. They joined hand and they made every other POC to have a stay and a voice in the said country. So what are you still saying? Every other person just don't want people that looks like me to express themselves and how they have they see it as, oh my god, you are just, but deep inside of them they know that they are fair treated compared to people that looks like me. Like, why are you just looking for stories, looking for any form of thing to actually you know prove that, oh, every other person who went through nobody is saying that every other people do not went through slavery or not went through oppression and all of that. Even people are still going through oppression right now. The people that have been deported are going through oppression, right? But the fact is that black people are just making you guys to understand that people that looks like me went through what they call chattel slavery. Like they like they suffered the most, if it's just something that is so digested to understand. And the better you want to understand this, the better for everyone, and all this back and forth argument, you know anytime that every other person will just look for a way to, like, oh my god, you guys complain, but these are the same people that are still fighting to date for every other person, for every other POC group. But the same people who decided that they are standing on business decided to just not do nothing. What has the state turned out to be? Just for the very first time that black people are standing on business, not getting themselves involved with some things. Now look at what is really happening. People are getting deported. People are getting into the country. Like, anyway, lovely listener, just leave me your own thoughts in the comment section of what I think of this video. And please, if you've not subscribed to this channel up to this extent, do your goal a huge favor to click on the subscription button. Like, and I will see you lovelies when I upload the next one. Your own thought in the comment section of what you think of this video. Please subscribe to this channel if you're yet to do that. Like, and I will see you lovelies when I upload the next one.